Hi everyone, this is a brief introduction to the skeletal system, and let's just start by seeing, do you know the names of these types of bones? So just take a few seconds and see if you can identify what's the name of A, B, C, and D on this slide. And when you think you're ready, you can unpause the video and you can continue. I'll give you the answers at the end of this lecture, by the way. One thing to take note of is before we get started, you guys should know that we're going to be using the book often, or you're going to be using the book often to look at pictures and names of bones for nearly all of your homework and your classwork. And within the first couple days of this unit, you should be immediately familiar with some major bone names. So you don't have to memorize them right at this second, but these should be among the first ones that you memorize. The thigh bone is known as the femur. The arm bone is known as the humerus. The lower jaw is the mandible. The two bones in your forearm are the radius and the ulna. The heel is the calcaneus bone. The spine is made of multiple bones called the vertebrae. The forehead is made of multiple bones, as the skull is made of multiple bones, and the one that makes up your forehead is called your frontal bone. Your hand has multiple bones called the metacarpals, and your wrist is made of bones called the carpals. The essential question for today is, how is the skeletal system arranged? And by the end of this lecture, you should be able to answer that question using the vocabulary shown on the right. So first, we're going to talk about the functions of the skeletal system very briefly, and then the majority of this is going to be looking at the parts of the skeletal system with a major focus on the bones. So the functions of the skeletal system, first of all, you know that your skeleton supports your body. And the reason why you're able to move is because you have muscles attached to your bones, and when those muscles contract, they pull your bones. Next, your bones are responsible for protecting your soft organs. So you have your rib cage that protects your heart and your lungs, and so on. You have bones, the bone tissue is able to store minerals and fats, and one of the most important ones is calcium. So when you are low on calcium, your bones release calcium into your blood, and when you eat very calcium-rich foods like yogurt or milk or whatever, then your bones store that calcium away, which makes them more dense and stronger. And then last of all, you should know that bones are responsible for forming blood cells in a process called hematopoiesis. And so as you grow up, your bones will continue to replace the blood that you lose, because blood cells do have a very short lifespan. So the bones are only one part of the skeletal system, and I've put a little, trapezoid border here for you so that you can see in this image, which is your knee joint. This is your bone, right? So that's the tibia bone, which makes up your lower leg. But in addition to the bones, you also have the joints. And so the joint would basically be all of the structures associated with where two bones meet together. Next would be the cartilage. And you can see that the cartilage is always found at the joints. So you're going to have some white cartilage here, where the bone is shown to you with this golden color, and the cartilage that caps it is shown in this glossy white. And then you would also have additional cartilage on the other bone as well. It's just not shown very clearly in this particular model. And last of all, you would have the ligaments. And so the ligaments are this shiny white, very, very strong tissue, connective tissue, that is connecting this bone here, which is your femur or your thigh bone, to this bone here, which is your tibia bone. And then you would have additional ligaments in other places. Like here, you'll notice that the patella, which is the kneecap bone, part of it has been cut away in this particular model, just so that you can see that there are additional tendons on the inside of the patellar bone that connects and anchors the bones at this joint. Okay, last of all, you'll notice that right here there's this area where the cartilage has been worn away. There could be any number of reasons why that might happen, but it could just simply be old age, that as you go through your life, that you're putting more wear and tear at your joints. And so as your cartilage wears away, that puts you at risk of arthritis. And we're going to discuss that in a future lecture in this unit. Let's discuss bones for the rest of this lecture. So there are 4 parts of the skeletal system, but the major part is, of course, the bones. So what are bones made of? Out of the 206 bones that you might find in an adult skeleton, all of them will have compact bone, which is this very dense region that you see here on the outside of the bone. And this is a very homogeneous region of bone, so it's very tightly organized. But then as you go deeper inside the bone, you'll see spongy bone. So spongy bone is composed of these smaller pieces of bone that are fused together, and then there are many open spaces that are interspersed within there, where blood cells can form, where calcium can be stored away, stuff like that. Here's another view of that. So you can see this is a bone, and on the outside of it, it's very dense and compact. And then on the inside, it's more spongy. And then there is a hollow area in the middle where you would find your bone marrow. And we'll talk about the function of the bone marrow and the spongy bone and the compact bone in another lesson. One last thing to look at before I move along is you'll see that you have these blood vessels that are penetrating into the bone. And that's because bone is a living tissue. It is an actual, it's made of living cells, and that means you do have to feed them with the substances that your blood carries to them. We're going to talk about how bones are arranged next. So when you think about all of the bones in your body, we can separate them into 2 divisions based on where they're located. The first being the axial skeleton, which is basically all of the bones that are along the vertical axis of the body. So if you cut a line down the middle of your body from your head to your toes, which bones would fall right along that midline? And that would really just be the skull and the bones of the vertebral column, like the ribs and the sternum, and the things like that. And then all of the other bones in your body make up the appendicular skeleton. So those would be all of the bones that make up your limbs and the things that are appended to your limbs. So, for example, your arm bones, your finger bones, your wrist bones, things like that. So here you can see the axial skeletal bones are shown in purple, or blue, I guess that's blue, and the appendicular bones are shown in pink. All right, last of all, we can classify bones according to what their structure is. And their structure is going to enable them to perform different functions. So for example, you see these flat bones here, right there. So you have flat bones in your rib cage, and that enables them to form a cage around your internal organs. You also have flat bones in your skull, and they enable the bones to form a cage around your brain, and so on. Versus long bones, like this one here, they're long because they enable you to have maximal force of movement at a joint, and so on. So there are 4 main types of bones that you'll find in your body in terms of their shape. There's long bones, short bones, flat bones, and irregular bones. There is one more type, and it's shown in red here and here, as well as in certain other places, and that's called the sesamoid bone, but it's much less common, so we're going to just talk about it at the end of this. So let's start with long bones. Long bones are typically longer than they are wide, and they have a shaft with heads at both ends. So, for example, this is your thigh bone right there, your femur. Here's the shaft of the femur, and then here's the head of the femur where it connects to the hip, And then here is, well, it's covered by the navigation bar, but there's another head on the other side where it connects to the bones of the lower leg. Um, and the long bones are going to have mostly compact bone, which gives them additional strength. And that's because the long bones are the ones that are supporting most of the forces of your body. So some great examples of long bones are your femur here and your humerus here. But then you can see there are additional ones here, like obviously your tibia, your radius, and your ulna. Those are all long bones as well. The next type are short bones. So these are generally relatively cube-shaped, and they fit together like a puzzle. And they do contain mostly spongy bone, and you'll find short bones here in your wrist. They're called the metacarpals. And you'll find additional ones in your ankles. They're called your your tarsals. Metatarsals. We also have flat bones, and these are thin and flattened. They're usually curved, and they form, they do have compact bone around a very thin layer of spongy bone in the middle, and they form these cages, these curved cages, around the most important parts of your body. So examples would be the flat bones that make up your skull, the flat bones that make up your ribs, and then also the flat bone of your sternum. And then you'll notice that the ribs are anchored to the sternum with cartilage, which is shown here in purple. Cartilage is not bone, but you will find cartilage in between bones at all joints as well as in places like this. The last of the major bones in your body are the irregular bones, and these are called that because they are irregularly shaped. So they're not long, they're not short, they're just like these weirdly shaped bones. And so a couple examples of those are the bones of your vertebrae. So here's your spine, and your spine is made of vertebrae, multiple bones that linked together that are only slightly movable. And you can see that if we take bones, like different vertebrae bones from different regions along the spine, they're all really weirdly shaped. They have these like these hollows in the center where your spinal cord will go to be protected, as well as additional regions where the spinal nerves can come out, but they're just like these weird shapes. And then same thing with your hip bones. You can see your hip bone is just this really, really oddly shaped bone. Now there is one more type of bone which wasn't covered in the previous slides, and those are sesamoid bones. They're called that because they're shaped like sesame seeds, and they're typically fairly flat. You'll mainly find them embedded in tendons, which are the connective tissues that anchor your skeletal muscles to your bones. And the reason why they're there is they just give some protection against the forces that you're putting on your bones and your joints when you do major movements like bending your knee or bending your elbow or like pressing against the ball of your foot. And so a couple examples of those are the patellar bone right there, which is covered by the ligament and the tendons. And then over here, same thing. These are covered by the tendons as well, but you have one little sesamoid bone here and another one there in the ball of your big toe. Okay, so let's see how you do on this quiz. I asked you these questions at the beginning of this lecture, so just take a moment, pause the video, and when you're ready you can unpause and I'll tell you the answers. Alright, so what do you know about these bones? For bone A over here, this is the humerus. It's the upper arm bone, and it is a long bone. It's part of the appendicular skeleton. For bone B over here, these are the metacarpals, and they are short bones. They are part of the appendicular skeleton as well. Over here, for C, this is the frontal bone, and is the bone that basically covers your forehead. It is a flat bone, and it's part of the axial skeleton. And then over here for bone D, this is a bone in your vertebra. This is one vertebra in your spine. It is a irregular shaped bone, and it is part of your axial skeleton. Here are your key takeaways. The skeletal system supports the body, protects organs, stores minerals, and produces blood cells. Those are its functions. In terms of its structure, it's made of bones, joints, cartilage, and ligaments. And the bones are the most important part. So they're made of compact and spongy bone tissue, and they're classified in two ways. By location, they're either part of the axial skeleton along the midline of your body, or they're part of the appendicular skeleton, which means they're bones that are appended to the axial skeleton. Or you can classify them by shape. So we have long bones, short bones, flat bones, irregular bones, and sesamoid bones. I'd like you to go back to the beginning of this lecture where I asked you your essential question, and I want you to see if you can answer the essential question using all of the vocabulary on the right side. And if you can, that means that you have mastered this topic.